Let's be honest, chocolate chip cookies are always good, but when you have a really, really good one, it's life-changing. We pretty much bought all the chocolate chips in New York City. We baked, we tested, we ate, and now we have the ultimate chocolate chip recipe for you. We're gonna ball out with a few extra flavors, but really all you need for cookies are sugar, flour, fat, eggs, and chocolate. And on our quest to find the best, we had to test out what all of these ingredients do to a cookie and how we can use their best properties to come up with the ultimate recipe. Let's talk sugar. So we've got white sugar, light brown sugar, and dark brown sugar. Really the only difference is the addition of molasses. Light brown sugar has a bit of molasses and dark brown has a bit more molasses in it. For this test, we wanted to see what just using one sugar in each dough would do to a cookie. With all white sugar, spread the most, didn't have a ton of flavor. Light brown sugar was a little bit chewier, spread a little bit less, and the dark brown sugar was really overpowering in its flavor and spread the least. And visually, you can see a big difference too. And what we found was you really can't get that classic flavor just using one. Next thing we had to tackle is flour. So we've got all-purpose, bread flour, and cake flour. Really the only difference here is the amount of protein and therefore gluten in these flours. Just think about it like this. Bread's like really nice and chewy, has a great texture, great structure, having that gluten and protein. Whereas cake, you think of it as tender, it's light, it's airy, it's gonna have less of those things. What it really comes down to is taste and texture. All-purpose gave you, standard cookie. The bread flour led to a significantly chewier cookie. The cake flour was the one that really spread the most. It was pretty delicate. And then similar to sugar, we decided that in order to get the best result, you gotta use a combination of two. So on to fat. We wanted to see the difference between softened butter and melted butter. And then we wanted to see what would happen if we switched it out completely and used coconut oil. Between softened butter and melted butter, visually they look pretty similar. The melted butter spread a little bit more. And then taste, we didn't notice a huge difference either. Tested with coconut oil and it worked. It was a cookie. But it lost like that great oomph, that butter brings to all baked goods. And so in the end, we definitely prefer using butter. Eggs, we went pretty simple with this one. Just an egg and an egg yolk contributes to more of like a fudgier, richer cookie. Obviously, we're making chocolate chip cookies, we have to have chocolate chips, but we're also gonna add a little bit something extra with some chunks of dark chocolate. Cut it with a serrated knife into little chunks and add that to your dough. It's really nice because you have like a variance of flavors and textures throughout. It's really just a few fundamental ingredients and learning how to master their properties in order to get the best result that you're after. And finally, after all that testing, we came up with our ultimate recipe. Here we go. So we're gonna start by sifting out the flour. We're gonna do all-purpose and bread flour, salt and baking soda as well. We really liked the chew factor of the bread flour with a combination of all-purpose to kind of give us best of both worlds. And then we're gonna move on to the butter. So we're gonna do melted butter, but we're gonna take it one step further and brown it. All you need to do to make brown butter is throw it all in a saucepan and get it to a boil. After a few minutes of boiling, the milk solids in the butter are gonna start to toast and turn a really gorgeous brown, nutty color. Keep stirring it to make sure that the butter is browning evenly, and once you can see the really dark brown bits on the bottom, you're gonna pour it off, ideally into a liquid measuring cup. This is gonna do two things. One, it's going to quickly cool down the butter so it stops the cooking. You don't wanna burn it. And then also we wanna make sure that we have a cup of liquid when it's all said and done. So while making the brown butter, you do end up boiling off a good amount of liquid. So we're just gonna top it up with a bit of water until we reach 1 cup. So just let it chill out for a bit, come to room temperature before you proceed. So we found that we really need a combination of white and dark brown sugar to get that really great flavor that we were after. So add the vanilla at this point and the espresso powder. The espresso powder is one of those little flavor boosters. Again, all about those contrasting notes that really work well with anything really sweet. And then you're gonna add in that liquid gold. Oh my gosh, so nice. And cream those together. This is another reason why we want the butter to be a little bit on the cooler side. It incorporates really, really nicely with the sugar. When we were testing, if you add the brown butter when it's too hot, it can make the dough a little bit greasy. Then in go the egg and the egg yolk. Ugh, and the smell that comes off this thing, oh my God. It's pretty much like the best smell you can get from cooking. And then go the flour. We like to do it in about thirds or so, just so they don't have flour going all over your kitchen. And just beat it until you don't see a ton of extra flour. It doesn't need to be totally incorporated. A little bit of flour that's not incorporated is actually good. You'll finish incorporating the rest of the flour when you fold in the chocolate. The nice thing about using these chunks is that you get some small shards of chocolate that kind of get everywhere, mixed with the chopped up chocolate chunks, and it's just kind of like, oh, so good. And that's it. That's your dough. Try not to eat it all when it's raw. All right, so if you're an A+ student, you can go ahead and put these in the fridge to chill overnight. You'll get the best flavor that way, but if you have no self-restraint like me, you can bake them off right now. The nice thing about this dough is it has so much flavor that we've built into it that they're still gonna be really, really good if you bake them right away. If you are gonna be amazing and put them in the fridge overnight, we do recommend scooping them first and putting them on a baking sheet, then putting them in the fridge. It's just so much easier than trying to scoop a really hard dough from the fridge. Cookies are kind of the equalizer of all baked goods. You know, there's so much fancy stuff out there, but honestly, is there anything better than a perfect chocolate chip cookie? Just look at that. You've got these pockets of chocolate from using those big chocolate chunks. It's got all the cracks and crinkles that you want in a chocolate chip cookie. The center's ooey gooey. The outside is crunchy. It's just got kind of like all the flavor and texture that you could possibly pack into one little cookie. And you'll never go back to another recipe again. There's a list of like top 5 smells in the culinary world, and I'm pretty sure butter comes up #1 all the time. And this is just a list I made up, but
I was gonna say, what?
It's a top culinary list. Ask anyone. Oh my god, brown butter? Ah, it's so good. Eggs are quick, cheap, and easy, and if you don't have them in your fridge already, you probably should. Here are 5 easy ways to cook eggs perfectly every time. You don't need much for these first 2 preparations. All you need is a good non-stick skillet that doesn't have any scratches on it, a rubber spatula, some salt and pepper, and a good amount of butter. You want to use a non-stick skillet. Eggs are notoriously sticky because of all the protein and a lot of other stuff in there. And you also want to make sure that you're not using any metal utensils on the pan itself. First up, scrambled eggs, one of my personal faves. Scrambled eggs, there's a lot of different ways to cook them. This is what we prefer at Tasty Kitchen. It's a great idea to crack them into a separate bowl first. One, in case you have any big chunks of eggshell in there. If any shell does get into the bowl itself, totally fine. Take an eggshell that you just cracked and use that to go in and get the shell out. While it might seem easier to crack them into the pan and scramble them in there, it's not really a good even way to do it. You'll have some big chunks of egg white, some big chunks of egg yolk. Just trust me, it's an easy bowl to clean. Just throw them in a bowl first and scramble them in there. So instead of adding milk or cream, we just use a lot of butter. You start with about 2 tablespoons of butter, get it nice and foamy in the pan, and when it's pretty much all the way melted, we're going to season our eggs with a bit of salt and pepper and any other seasonings you want, and then into the pan. We want to keep our heat pretty low here, and we're actually not going to move the eggs at all until we kind of see a little bit of the egg setting on the sides of the pan. When you start to see a little bit of the eggs set, that's when you want to take a rubber spatula and from the outside in, push the eggs towards the center and kind of all around the pan so that all the eggs are cooking pretty evenly. When they're about 3/4 of the way cooked, we're going to do a real sneaky trick here and add a few cubes of butter. That's another tablespoon cut into 4s or so. We're going to melt those cubes of butter into the eggs themselves, and they're going to kind of emulsify sort of this like creamy, nice meltiness into the scrambled eggs, and they add this like really beautiful creamy texture at the end. So we recommend taking them off a little bit before you think. The residual heat within the eggs will continue to cook them until they're the perfect doneness. I mean, it definitely takes an art and takes a little bit of time to get the scrambled egg right, but there's just something so good about it. It just kind of like hits all those salty, creamy, fatty notes for me, and I just really, really love having scrambled eggs. The fried egg. I think people are afraid of fried eggs. I don't know, there's like so many different ways to do it. It's like, should the pan be high heat? Should it be low? How do you get that perfect color? We're gonna do ours on a medium heat for the fried egg. So add butter to the pan, add your egg into the butter. So you want it to be hot enough that the egg white is kind of setting when it goes in. Let it start cooking, and you wanna make sure that it's not so hot that the egg white itself is like going all over and boiling like crazy. Add just a few drops of water at this point and immediately cover with a lid. And that's gonna create a good amount of steam in the pan. So it's gonna help cook the egg white without being on such a high heat that the egg yolk will cook through as well. At that point, once it's cooked for a few minutes, you have the world's most picture-perfect egg. Really yellow, vibrant yolk. The white is cooked through. There's none of that weird, like, snotty bit that no one likes, like undercooked egg white. It just takes maybe a minute or 2 with that steam on top, and then you have a picture-perfect egg. I mean, you could Instagram that. There's a million things on the internet of like how to get the perfectly hard-boiled egg. We've tested a whole bunch, and this is our tried and true method to get your perfect boiled egg every time. You want to put them over medium-high heat because you want to bring them to a boil, but you want it to kind of happen slowly. So similar to potatoes, we're doing this because we want them to cook really evenly. We don't want the outside to cook before the inside can. Once it's at a rolling boil, you want to take it off the heat, cover, and set your timer. Between 4 and 16 minutes, depending on how you like your yolks cooked. And then once they're cooked to your liking, you want to immediately take the eggs out and put them into an ice bath. That's going to stop the cooking right away to make sure that your yolk is going to be cooked to your preference. If you leave them in the hot water or just like take them out of the hot water and don't cool them down, then you'll get that like really weird chalky, like grayish green yolk, which we don't want. And just as a visual, here are eggs cooked at all of these different times. You can see how much softer the yolk is at 4 minutes, whereas 16 it's completely cooked through. You can just cut them in halves or quarters, throw them right on top of the salad. They add like a nice amount of color and freshness, I think. They're also a really good snack as well, but there's a million different recipes you can use for hard-boiled eggs. Poached. All right, so for poaching eggs, which I honestly don't think is too scary, you want to use a big pot of water. There's just like more room for the egg to kind of move around, and you want to make sure that your pot of water is, I know this sounds crazy, but like at a hard simmer. Like, you don't want it so boiling that the water is really disruptive and it's gonna shake the egg a ton. But if it's not moving at all, then the egg will just completely sink to the bottom and there won't be any movement rolling that egg white over the egg yolk. Similar to scrambled eggs, you're always gonna wanna make sure that you're cracking your eggs into a bowl first. And then we're gonna do a little whirlpool trick. So you're gonna stick your spoon in, swirl the water, and then that center whirlpool is where we're gonna drop our egg into. As it's slowing down is when you wanna add your egg. If it's still going too heavy, if the whirlpool's too fast, then the egg's just gonna be like, whoa. You wanna let the egg go and do its thing in there until you kind of can't see any of that translucent egg white anymore. With a poached egg, you want the egg yolk to still be quite runny, but again, no one wants like a runny egg white. And that is a poached egg. So we're gonna blot it, get all the extra water off there, and then you're ready to eat. So that's the traditional method. But if you were doing a whole bunch, we've got a trick for you. So instead of a big deep pot, we're just gonna use like a saute pan that has flat sides, like 3 or 4 inches deep, that you can put some of these heat-safe glass bowls and have them completely covered in water. And for this one, I can do like 3, maybe even 4 at a time, depending on how big your bowls are and how big your pot is. And then same deal, you want to crack your eggs into a separate dish. But what I'm going to do is actually go from one dish to another. And what that bowl is going to do is it's going to keep the egg contained in that space. This is cool because you can get a nice rounded shape every time, but it's going to look a little bit different than your classic poached egg. If you're just doing this for your friends and family at home, I don't think anyone will mind. It'll still taste the same. It's easier for you to do a whole bunch of them. And then it's a little less intimidating way to approach poached eggs. Really good, nice, soft, delicate way to have an egg. And it's also kind of an impressive way to serve something that's pretty cheap. I love poached eggs.
Yeah. Are poached your favorite? Wait, do we know?
I think my problem is I don't have a favorite. I like them all. If I had children, it'd be eggs. You can't really choose one, right? Depends on the day. People always say to me, oh, I'm not a baker, I can't bake. It's not that it's difficult, it's just once you know kind of the basics of what's happening when you're baking, it makes the whole process easier. If you can carry on a few rules, they become second nature once you've done them a few times. Here's a few starter rules to get you going and give you a little bit more confidence when you're in the kitchen. Like, it's still really fun, even though you have to follow some rules. First things first, read the recipe through. I cannot express this enough. You just kind of want to know what you're getting yourself into when you're baking, and it'll make baking a much more enjoyable experience. Baking is more about controlling the variables in a recipe. You know, baking is all about ratios. Pound cake is going to be a little bit more on the dense side, whereas sponge cake has an entirely different ratio of fat, sugar, and flour. Baking's especially difficult because of the leaveners that are in there. The difference between baking soda and baking powder is that baking powder has baking soda in it, but it also has an acid that reacts to the baking soda and allows it to kind of bubble and rise.